Hello and welcome. This is a short training in our Pharma Forecasting learning series, and today we're going to talk about pricing, specifically the role that price plays in a patient-based forecast, and how to use it to calculate the annual cost of a treatment. Now, I want to reassure you at the start, you do not need any finance or pricing background to follow this. We'll define every term as we go. If you've ever built or looked at a forecast that starts from how many patients are there, this session is going to show you where price fits into that picture, and why getting it right matters more than almost anything else. Let me frame the whole session with one line, the one on your screen. Volume tells you how many, price tells you how much. A forecast needs both. Most of the effort in our models goes into the how many, counting patients. But the how much, the price, is where a forecast quietly succeeds or fails. That's what we're here to fix. Let's start with the big picture. Where does price actually sit in a forecast? Look at the row of boxes across the top. This is what we call a patient-based forecast, sometimes called a bottom-up forecast, because we build it up from patients rather than starting from a total sales number. We start on the left with epidemiology. That's just the number of people who have the disease. Then we narrow down. Of those, how many are actually treated? Then which line of therapy they're in. First line meaning the first treatment they try. Second line meaning what they switch to if that fails. Then the regimen share, the slice of patients who get our particular drug. Then the duration, how long they stay on it. Multiply all of that together and you get units, the number of tablets, or vials, or doses the market consumes. Here's the key idea. Everything in that chain, everything up to units, is the volume. And notice the label underneath it. Volume is bounded. It's anchored to real-world data, patient registries, clinical studies. You cannot invent more patients than actually exist. There's a ceiling on it. Then comes the last step. We take those units and we multiply by price. And that gives us revenue, the money. Price is literally the final multiplier in the equation. And here's why that final multiplier is so important, and the theme of this whole session. Because price multiplies everything to its left, it has enormous leverage. A change in the net price flows almost 1-for-1 into your forecasted revenue. If your price is off by a fifth, your revenue is off by roughly a fifth, no matter how carefully you count the patients. So price deserves at least as much care as the patient numbers, and often it doesn't get it. Now let me define 3 things about price that this audience especially needs to know. These 3 boxes on the right are the concepts people most often get wrong. First, forecast the net price, not the list price. What's the difference? The list price, sometimes called WAC, wholesale acquisition cost, is the official sticker price of the drug. But almost nobody actually pays the sticker. Along the way, the manufacturer gives money back through things like rebates, negotiated discounts paid back to insurers or pharmacy middlemen, statutory discounts, discounts required by law for government programs, 340B, a US federal program that forces steep discounts for certain hospitals and clinics, and channel fees, the cut taken by distributors and pharmacies. Add all of those up and you get the gross to net, the gap between the sticker price and what the company actually keeps. The number the company truly collects is the net price, and that is the only number you should put in a forecast. As the slide says, that gap can erode the realized revenue to as little as half of the list price. So if you forecast on list, you can overstate revenue by that much before you've even looked at a single patient. Second, price is not static. A drug's net price doesn't sit still over the years of a forecast. It moves, sometimes up with inflation or improved market access, and often down. The big downward forces, loss of exclusivity, or LOE, which is when the patent protecting the drug expires, and then biosimilars and generics, cheaper copycat versions that flood in once that protection is gone and crush the price. So you don't use one flat price for 10 years, you model a curve that changes across the time horizon. Third, stress test price first. Stress testing, also called sensitivity analysis, just means wiggle an assumption up and down and see how much the answer moves. Because price has the 1-for-1 leverage, it's almost always the assumption that moves the forecast the most. So it's the first thing you should test with a high case and a low case. And for dose-based drugs where the dose depends on the patient's body size, that body size feeds straight through into how many units you use, and therefore into cost. Hold that thought, because the next slides build directly on it. So now let's get practical. One of the most common things you'll be asked to calculate is the annual cost of therapy. We'll call it ACOT for short. In plain terms, what does it cost to treat one patient with this drug for 1 year? This number is the bridge between one dose and a full forecast, so it's worth learning to build carefully. The formula is at the top, and it's simpler than it looks. Annual cost equals cost per dose times doses per year. The cost of a single dose is just the number of units you need, tablets or vials, multiplied by the price per unit. Then, and this is the part people forget, you adjust for real-world factors like adherence and treatment duration. We'll spend a whole slide on that adjustment later, because it's the most common mistake. Now here's the important lesson on this slide. The way you build up the calculation is different for two kinds of drugs, and mixing them up is where errors creep in. On the left, the flat, oral drug. Think of a pill you take every day. The dose is fixed. Everyone takes the same milligrams. It doesn't depend on how big the patient is. The units are simply tablets or capsules, and there's no waste. You use the whole pill. The frequency is doses per day times the number of days on therapy in a year. And you adjust for adherence and persistence, how reliably the patient actually takes it. Those are measured with metrics called MPR and PDC, which we'll define shortly. On the right, the dose-based injectable. Think of an infusion given in a clinic, common in oncology. Here the dose depends on the patient's body size, either their weight, written as milligram per kilogram, or their body surface area, abbreviated BSA and measured in square meters, a standard way of sizing chemotherapy doses. The units are vials, and here's a crucial wrinkle. You almost always have to round up to whole vials, because you can't buy half a vial. Whatever's left in the vial is thrown away, that's wastage, and you pay for it. The frequency is doses per cycle times cycles per year, and often there's a bigger loading dose at the very start. And you adjust for how long the course of treatment lasts and when patients stop. So, same formula, two very different build-ups. Flat and clean on the left, body size driven and wasteful on the right. Let's now actually run the numbers on one of each. Here are the two worked examples, side by side. A quick note before we start. These numbers are illustrative. I've picked round figures to make the method clear. In your real work, you drop in the actual price and dosing. It's the method I want you to take away, not these specific dollars. Example on the left, the oral, non-oncology drug. Say it's a 10 milligram tablet, taken once a day, every day. Step 1, dose per day, 1 tablet. Step 2, the price. $5 per tablet, that's a $150 pack of 30 tablets, so 150 divided by 30 is $5 each. Step 3, doses per year. Taken every day, that's 365. Step 4, 365 tablets times $5. And that gives us an annual cost of about $1,825 per patient per year. Nice and simple, no body size, no waste. You'll notice the small note underneath. About $1,550 once you account for 85% adherence. Park that, it's the subject of the final slide. Example on the right, the oncology infusion, dosed by weight. This one shows every wrinkle we just discussed. It's an intravenous antibody given at 6 milligrams per kilogram every 3 weeks, for a 1-year course, and let's take a patient weighing 55 kilograms. Step 1, the dose. 6 milligrams times 55 kilograms is 330 milligrams. See how the patient's weight drives the dose directly. Step 2, the vials. The drug comes in 150 milligram vials. We need 330 milligrams. 330 divided by 150 is 2.2 vials, but we can't buy 2.2, so we round up to 3 vials. 3 vials is 450 milligrams. We only use 330. So 120 milligrams get thrown away. That's the wastage, and we still pay for it. Step 3, cost per dose. 3 vials times $500 a vial is $1,500. Step 4, doses per year. 1 every 3 weeks, so 52 weeks divided by 3 is about 17 doses. And 17 doses times $1,500 gives us roughly $25,500 per patient per year. And notice the footnote, this is just the drug. It excludes the cost of the infusion itself and the staff time to administer it, which in a full cost of care model you'd add on top. So step back and compare. Same simple formula both times. But the oncology drug is more than 10 times the annual cost, driven by weight-based dosing, vial wastage, and the high per vial price. That contrast is exactly why we separate the two methods. This is the most important slide in the deck, because it's the mistake I see most often, and it's the one that will make your forecast fail a sanity check. Everything we just calculated assumed a kind of perfect patient, one who takes every single dose, every day, for the entire year. We call that the label ACOT, the cost if the drug is used exactly as the label prescribes. But real patients are not perfect. They forget doses, they stop early, and if you ignore that, you overstate how much drug each patient actually consumes. There are two separate ideas here, and it's worth keeping them distinct. The first is adherence, sometimes called compliance. That's about how completely a patient takes their doses while they're on the treatment. If they're prescribed 30 pills a month but only take 25, that's about 83% adherence. It's measured with two metrics you'll hear: MER, medication possession ratio, and PDC, proportion of days covered. Both are just ways of expressing what fraction of the prescribed doses did the patient actually have. The second is persistence. That's a different question. How long does the patient stay on the drug before they quit altogether? It's measured as time on therapy, or as the percentage of patients still taking the drug at, say, 12 months. So adherence is about how faithfully you take it while you're on it. Persistence is about how long you stay on it at all. Now, why does ignoring these make the ACOT wrong? Look at the chart. We start with our label figure, the $1,825 from the oral example, assuming 100% adherence and a full 12 months. Then we apply a realistic adherence of 85%. That brings it down to about $1,551. Then we apply persistence. Say patients are on the drug only about 80% of the year on average, and it drops again to about $1,241. That's roughly 32% lower than the label figure. Nearly a third of the cost, and therefore nearly a third of the revenue, would simply be wrong if you'd stopped to the label number. And here's the consequence, which is the real punchline for a forecaster. This error doesn't stay small. You've overstated the cost for one patient, and then you multiply that by every patient in the population. The mistake compounds, and the telltale sign is that your bottom-up forecast won't reconcile with the top-down sales. That is, when you check your patient build number against the company's actual historical total sales, they won't match, and this is usually why. One practical tip before we move on. You might think, do I multiply adherence and persistence together? You can, but be careful not to double count, because they overlap. The clean shortcut is to use the single PDC metric, proportion of days covered over the full year, because it already blends both effects into one honest number. Days the patient wasn't covered, whether from a skipped refill or from quitting entirely, are all captured in one figure. So one well-chosen real-world factor beats two rough ones stacked on top of each other. That's the core of it. Let me leave you with the three things worth remembering. 1. In a patient-based forecast, price is the final multiplier. It carries huge leverage, so treat it with the same care as your patient numbers. 2. Always forecast on the net price, not the list price, and remember the price isn't frozen, it moves over time. And 3. When you build an annual cost of therapy, don't stop at the label. Adjust for the real world, adherence and persistence, or your forecast won't reconcile with reality. Thank you for watching. If this was useful, you can subscribe to the channel for more short trainings like this one across pharma forecasting, competitive intelligence, market research, and analytics. And if you'd like tailored support, disease landscape, market forecasts, competitive intelligence, or epidemiology reports, the contact address is on the screen. healthcare.support@tenastrategia.com. See you in the next one.